Our recording is now in progress. We do have closed captioning available for this webinar, so please click on the CC or more, and then you hit the CC to view closed captioning, and you can also view the entire transcript of the meeting by clicking on Show Transcript. This webinar will be recorded and it will be posted at the NEC website, power2u.org. After the presentations, we're going to have a Q&A. We'll start with answering questions from the chat. So please feel free to ask questions in the chat at any time during the webinar. And if there's time, we may have some time for you to ask live questions also. So I'm now going to introduce our first presenter, who I'm very excited to introduce. Our first presenter is Dan Fisher, whose life purpose comes from his lived experience of recovery from schizophrenia, which inspired him to dedicate himself to helping others find their voice and recover. He earned an MD and completed his residency in psychiatry at Harvard Medical School and has practiced as a board-certified community psychiatrist for 30 years. In 1992, he co-founded the federally funded National Empowerment Center, and he was a commissioner on the President's New Freedom Commission on Mental Health from 2002 to 2003. So I'll now turn it over to Dan.
Okay, thank you very much, Shira, and it's a pleasure to be here with you all. I wish I could be there in person. I'm just going to give a brief overview of this training of Finding Our Voice. I'll tell you a little bit of the history of it. So when I was on the New Freedom Commission from 2002 to 2003, I was able to get some of our values into the New Freedom Commission recommendations. For instance, we were able to get the vision statement to say that we see a future when everyone diagnosed with a mental illness will be able to recover. And that was pretty new. Just hold on one second while I keep my computer charged. Sally Zinman came to me and she said afterwards, she said, and she's a long-term leader in the movement, really, as I consider like a grandmother of the movement. She came to me and she said, so how did you manage to get recovery, front and center into this presidential report? And I told her I just wasn't quite sure. I just did it. I just kept pushing and pushing and pushing, and engaged as many people in public testimony as possible. So I talked to Judy Chamberlain also about it, a very strong advocate, late Judy Chamberlain. And I said to Judy, because she and I had helped start the National Empowerment Center, I said, we need to find a way to strengthen and develop the voice of new advocates. And we've just been sort of doing this by, by feel and mentoring. We by trial and error over our lifetime, we found sort of what helped, what didn't help. And so I said to Judy, we needed to really come up with some type of training. So she and I developed this training called Finding Our Voice, which is really, it's to find our authentic voice, to find our strong voice, to find our voice of advocacy. And it startles people, I think, when they hear someone speak from their heart, when they hear someone speak their truth. It captures people's attention in a way that slides and graphs really don't do. So we really encourage this. So we'll give you a brief overview here of this training that we actually are going to be putting on the first training in August, starting August 2nd. And at the end of the presentation, we'll give you a link, an email that you can apply for it. We still may have some openings, and if it does fill up, then we'll do another training, followed up with another training, because we really want more advocates out there. So let's see the next slide. This is a photograph of Blue Heron. And it just struck me. I was canoeing one day and with my wife, and we saw this come up around the corner. This is the moment before the heron takes off. And it's a lot of effort. He has to lean down, he has to raise his wings, and then boom, this incredible flight takes place. And this is symbolic, I feel, of what we're trying to help people do, is to take flight, to really experience your voice and be able to speak with passion. So here are some of the sessions that we'll go over. First session 1A is an overview of the training and sort of the background of it. And the second part is, it's also based on emotional CPR, a lot of the ideas of emotional CPR around connecting and empowerment. CPR, C is for connecting, E, and P is for empowerment, and R is for revitalizing, and about dialogue. And then the second session, each of these are 2.5 hours, is about how to use dialogue and how to use emotional CPR to make the transition from anger to passion. A lot of times when you're a new advocate, you go into a meeting, and I know for myself, I was full of anger. I still have the anger, but I've learned to do what Gandhi recommended, and that is take the anger and compress it, and it becomes a source of energy. And that's really what we recommend, the source of energy, the source of passion, because you don't want to give up your anger. And I'm still angry at the treatment that I received in involuntary, the 3 involuntary psych hospitalizations. And I just don't think it was necessary, but they didn't know how to communicate with me. So they had to put me in seclusion, they had to hold me down, they had to give me injections. And that just, it sears your soul. It sears your soul. And I sort of joke, the only good thing that came out of it was I was so angry, I decided to become a psychiatrist and try to change the system. And my lifelong goal is really to free people from these coercive environments into peer run respites and to Soteria type alternatives. And there are alternatives to psych hospitalizations. And with 988 coming out, that's what we should be emphasizing. I think it's coming out too soon, but I won't go into 988 right now. That is something to advocate about. So we want then people to identify a common vision, and we work in pairs usually to carry out your passion, and to identify your purpose and what you'd like to advocate for. So we ask people, what's most on your mind? Some people it's holistic health, some people it's peer support, some people it is peer run respites. There are a lot of alternatives that, and also the intersectionality is very important, and recognizing that all the diverse people of diverse backgrounds have been excluded, their voice as well. So this voice is for not only people labeled with psychiatric problems, but also people who've been labeled because of their ethnic background or because their gender preference. So then the third session, we help people to prepare with pride, a practical plan, because it's very important when you go to any meeting to have a plan in mind. And the fourth session is to go and to develop your presentation. So the goal of this really very much is to become proficient at being able to present from your heart what you really care about, and so that you can testify, so you can stand up in meetings, whether it's a committee meeting or it's and it's a little terrifying at first. I know when I first was in, even though I had a lot of experience in speaking, I was first there at the White House Commission. There were all these cameras on, and it was, it was C-SPAN was taking note of it. But if you have friends in the audience, that's very important. And I had stacked the audience with some friends, and so I was the last one to speak. And when I spoke, I said, recovery is what we want. We want a future. We want to know that there's hope. You can't, without hope, there's no future. And I just laid out, and there are ways to recover, and we've recovered, and I've recovered. I talked about my own experience of recovery from schizophrenia. And at the end of my talk, my friends in the audience got up and they clapped. And the guy sitting next to me, he was like assistant secretary of education or something. He said, "What's going on here? What's all this clapping? I've never seen this happen in a government meeting." And I said, "What you're experiencing, you're seeing as a movement. I'm just part of a movement. You see me, but behind me are millions of people. And I just happen to have the opportunity right now to be here at this table. But my voice represents many, many millions of people. So just remember that." And I would remind them of it whenever possible. Okay, so I'm not going to go through all the rest of the slides. Um, there is one though that I'm particularly fond of, and that's right here. A lot of this training is based on what we call 12 P's of empowerment. And it's a catchy little thing. A lot of these ideas start with P, personal support, and then you learn principles of recovery, and then you realize you have not been told that you could recover, and then you get in touch with your anger. You try to transform that anger to passion. You need other people to do that. And often people who are peers and fellow travelers, it's hard to transform that anger in the presence of people that haven't been through a similar experience. And then you can gain purpose and meaning, and then you can start to plan. Sometimes people try to plan too early before they've gotten in touch with their anger and can transform their anger. And then you're ready for politics, and you're ready for persistently presenting to other people. Okay, so I'm now going to introduce Joanne, Joanne Archangel, and she's an angel, sort of wanting to. She reactivated my own interest in finding her voice. She took the training about 3 years ago, and she and Richard contacted me a couple months ago and said, "You know, we need more of this." I won't go into what she said because she'll say it herself very well. She's a writer, an artist, an advocate, and a mother of an amazing child named Chase, who you're going to hear more from. And she moved to the United States at age 8, which is interesting because that's how old Chase is right now. And a trauma survivor, spent years as a consumer. She shares both her professional and personal lived experience, the hope of increasing empathy and connectedness. You know, it's my pleasure to introduce Joanne, and thank you very much for participating, Joanne. And we're going to stop sharing here. I'm going to stop sharing the slides so that we can just see Joanna. Thank you, Joanna. It's all yours.
Thank you, Dan. Welcome everybody to the Finding Our Voice webinar. You might be here because you yourself might have lived experience of mental health challenges, and that can include being a part of the system as a service recipient, or you might be both, having lived experience and working in the field of mental health. You might be here to support one of us or just learn more about finding our voice. Whatever the case, I'm glad that you're all here, and I take this platform with the highest degree of honor in being able to share some ideas and experiences that might resonate with you. I'm in no means, by any means, an expert at anything, even in my own lived experience. So if you bear with me for the next 8-10 minutes or so, I'll be sharing both my professional and personal experience, including being a mother. I want to read something. I am a master facilitator of Core Gift Discovery from the Core Gift Institute. And what it is it's an interview that you do for yourself and maybe with somebody. And at the end of it, you have a statement, a core gift statement. So here is mine, and it's the essence of who I am. My core gift is helping people find courage to navigate their world. I give it by helping people feel valued for who they are, express themselves from a space of authenticity, and connect with others to build community. That is my core gift statement. And part of the powerful thing about that is sometimes our gifts can come from a deep inner wound that we may have sustained as a child or while we were growing up. And that can inform our perspective of the world and how we interact with it. So throughout the next few minutes, I might share some of my experiences. So the root word of courage is core, which means heart. And one of its earliest forms, the word courage meant to speak one's mind by telling all of one's heart. And for finding our voice, why it deeply resonated with me was my earliest memories, which are really foggy. I've experienced a lot of this empowerment and things that happened to me that I couldn't consent to, I couldn't understand, couldn't cope with. So what I later realized, and when I was receiving mental health services, it was a culmination of those experiences and not really having the language and the support to navigate that. So for me, working in the mental health field now, for full time, I work for a nonprofit organization for transitional age youth program. And for part-time, I also connect with people who struggle with like mental health around employment. And to me, when we're talking about diversity, equity, accessibility, that also includes the diversity of our lived experiences, especially for something like mental health challenges. There's still a lot of stigma attached to that. So my goal in being able to offer my core gift is to maybe widen that lens and open more dialogue and be able to form more communities where there's a lot more compassion and understanding, and in that process, be able to build something stronger. In my youth, I actually encountered a lot of abuse, and there was such disempowerment that even after somebody had accused my abuser, I had to move back in with them. So for a while, my voice and my choices were taken away. And I saw what happened when somebody speaks up. I had a lot of challenges throughout my life, but there was, a lot of people who also helped guide me. And that included teachers, people who were very strengths-based. And so that resonated with me. And I took a peer support training, and that kind of really opened up my career path because I realized it was my calling. I know in California, we passed statewide peer certification for peer support specialists. So that's a huge accomplishment and very much gratitude to the people who worked really hard for us to get there. And so finding our voice to me is when I took the training, I learned a lot about dialogue, and the word dialogue has two roots, logos, which means through, and dia means through, and then logos meaning word. So it's the meaning of the word. So for me, it meant engaging with individuals while they're in crises or while they're experiencing tough challenges, and being able to just speak with them and being able to support them in finding their own voice. So when I took this training, it just affirmed a lot of what I knew within myself, what worked, what helped, what didn't help. And one of the positions that I was able to be a part of was managing a peer-run respite here in California. And I see elements of finding our voice. I know it's about advocacy, but it's also about working in a group. And I see about supervising peers and creating that synergy and supporting people as they navigate both their lived experience, as they navigate supporting others and creating that environment for people so that they can offer the support that people might need and can benefit from. That meant a lot to me because I used some of these elements of finding our voice to be able to lead the staff, and for me to look at myself and ask myself, the questions so that I may lead them and lead myself, most importantly, to be able to be effective. I am also a part of Disability Rights California's PAMI, or Protection and Advocacy for Individuals with Mental Illness Council. I serve as a public member, and while working with individuals in service provision, I'm able to bring up issues that might be close to them. And so I'm very passionate about supporting people bring up the challenges that they're facing. It's not often that people are, people who are unhoused, dealing with substance use, in crises, facing forced hospitalization. Not often we get to check in with them. So I also appreciate that platform. And I also took emotional CPR, and that really helped me as a service provider. One woman said to me, I can't forget, she said, "Thank you for not having a desk between us." And then she said that, this place really breathed life into me. So that meant a lot for me, because I've been through forced hospitalization and so much trauma, that now being a part of this side, to be able to assist people in that way and find their voice and speak to their strengths and gifts, really fulfills, my mentor would say, my pool of resiliency. And finding a voice is really about that river that's flowing, that synergy I was talking about, of the different voices involved, so that you can, formulate a way to connect. There's no one way to do it. I think it has to be organic. And so part of my experience also as a mother, you will meet my son Chase. I identify as neurodivergent. My son identifies with having autism and being autistic. He's 8 years old, and we had an encounter with a district contracted childcare program that aimed to discriminate against him. He was in the room when they said some children are just not a good fit. So at first I was emotional, and then I remembered the tools that I had at my disposal, being able to cite, having an IEP, or is a prior written notice, and an IEP is an individualized education program that he had. And they didn't really engage with us before making that decision. They met him on the same day. They were trying to kick him out of a program he had been participating in for months. And I got it down to a suspension for about 3 months. I was fighting it the whole way. I was aiming to do research, building allies. I filed a uniform complaint procedure, or a UCP complaint. And when he came back, I found him services, a one-on-one aid, educationally related mental health services. So he got connected with a therapist. At this time, he was only 5 years old. And so I thought about, people my whole life had been labeling me and saying what I can and can't do. I will not let that happen to my child. I've been told that I'll be on medication for my whole life. And while that may assist some people, and I was on medication for a good 2 years, all different kinds. But to this day, I've been medication free, and, it just wasn't working for me. But for someone to make that determination for someone else, it's not right. So I fought for my child, because he was in the room when they said this. And I looked at him and I said, no. Luckily, we also had a great regional center service coordinator, and just even her presence. So the importance of building allies and relationships really mattered, because they were there when we had the meeting. Just their presence alone, the regional center's presence, it meant a lot. And for me, my emotions, it could be a barrier, but at this time I used it as passion and strength. And, I asked, well, how many clients, regional center clients, is this happening to? How many families, people of color is this happening to? And so for me, finding our voice is not only about a training, it's about finding my own strengths and gifts to be able to share that in the communities where I serve and are part of, and also in parenting. I empower Chase. That's my goal, is to empower him as much as I am able, so that he can make decisions for himself, and see himself in a light where he feels confident to navigate the world. So I'm going to call Chase now and introduce him. So Chase is just coming over. Hello, and then
This video will hold some elements of advocacy, and if you find it inspiring, you can share it with others. Hope you enjoy it.
thank you, Chase, and Shira will pull up the video. Some people are saying hi, Chase.
Hi, my name is Chase. I am 8 years old, and welcome to the National Empowerment Center, our webinar, Finding Our Voice. This webinar is all about advocates. Being an advocate could be difficult, but advocates use many strategies and strengths in order to make advocacy easier and more effective. To start off, we're gonna talk about what is advocacy. Advocacy is about a person who advocates for someone and with someone. And sometimes they will help people. They would help people. Speaking of helping people, I learned something called emotional CPR. Emotional CPR is connecting, empowering, and revitalizing. That is ECPR. Now, we're going to talk about disabilities. Some people, including advocates, have disabilities. Not everyone has disabilities, and not everyone understands disabilities. But people have strengths like intelligence. You could have talents, and sometimes you are good at listening. There could be any types of strengths, like creativity. You are good at playing a piano or a certain instrument. You are good at a certain game. Those are strengths. All of them are strengths. There are also strengths about being kind. You also can be smart, strong, and kind. That's what my mom told me. This is where you're kind at, your heart. And now we're going to talk about accommodations and strategies. Accommodations like sensories. You could take a break, go for a walk. You could sing the ABCs, or you could take deep breaths. You could also count until you feel better. And I have the disability autism. And I had an experience when I was almost kicked out of a child care program. But my mom advocated for me to not be kicked out of the child care program. And they have new child care program teachers now. Now, Now we gotta understand flexibility and rigidness. Flexibility has to be greater. And sometimes you would have to listen to certain opinions. People with disabilities, like me, I have autism. And sometimes I hear a certain thing and I might not like it. But there are multiple ways to solve problems. What's ECPR? It's kind of like your emotions, like you talk to somebody. And then me CPR. It's kind of like the ECPR about you, your emotions going to other people. A we CPR is an emotional CPR in a group. Sometimes you would use your ECPR and spread it to the whole group. And there's also community ECPR. It would affect everyone around your area, not just your group, but other groups. It might affect more than one group. That's what advocates do. Make something effective and flexible using their voice, their passionate voice, and their actions, their listening ears, and their brain. Thus, there are senses you would have to use for advocacy. Now, people with disabilities have IEPs. Some people, not all people, and I have an IEP. An IEP is an individualized education program. Number one, these are the examples. Number one, one-on-one. A one-on-one will be there to support you, to have the accommodations, strategies. Accommodations I said earlier. And number two, therapist. I have a therapist. Her name is Miss Penny. And we talked about feelings together. That's where I learned flexibility and rigidness. I'm gonna tell you what happens when I'm with Miss Penny. Number one, me and Miss Penny check in. Next, my therapist hands me work I have to complete. Number three, sometimes we play together for a while. Like, for example, I play a game called Spot It with her. And I'm really good at that game. I just take the cards over and over and spot the thing over and over again. Then number four, I do breathing exercise. Like, my favorite one is the shark fin. It's kind of like the thumb going up and the thumb going down. And the shark fin. My mom and I came up with a checklist to check in. My mom asked me, do I feel loved, valued, safe, heard, supported, connected? My mom says I don't feel those things. I could always talk to her. Or someone I can trust, like my therapist, or maybe a one-on-one. The checklist is kind of like ECPR, because connected is similar to connecting. When the sharpest words want to cut me down, I'm going to send flood, gonna drown me now. I'm not scared to be seen. I make no apologies. This is me.
Thank you for all the comments in the chat. I hope we can save those for Chase. And I want to note that Chase is in the same program that came to kick him out. There are new teachers, there's a new program coordinator, and he's thriving in the same program. And it goes to show that message of he wasn't a good fit based on his disability. it means a lot to be here today. So thank you all for your kind comments. Great job, Chase. Want to say anything? And I think Chase will go ahead and introduce our next speaker.
Our next speaker is Richard Krzyżanowski. Richard Krzyżanowski is an editor, writer, and trainer who has worked for more than 20 years in mental health disabilities as a professional advocate, organizer, and educator focused on opposing discrimination and promoting rights. Richard is public policy chair for the California Association of Mental Health peer-run organizations and serves on the board of directors and is legislation and committee chair of the California Association of Mental Health Patients' Rights Advocates. He is a longtime member of the Client and Family Leadership Committee of California's Mental Health Services Oversight and Accountability Commission and the Patients' Rights Committee of the California Behavioral Health Planning Council. He is also an editor of the Roller Coaster Times, a quarterly publication of the Depression and Bipolar Support Alliance.
Thank you, Chase.
All right, hello. Thank you, Chase, for that all too long introduction. I should have trimmed that down, I think. But I just want to say it's wow, what a hard act to follow. And as Chase said, I'm Richard Krzyżanowski. I'm really honored not only to be doing this little presentation and promoting Finding Our Voice with people I consider friends and colleagues, but also all of you who are listening in. I see so many names of people that I've worked with and with whom I collaborated and advocated. It's a real honor to share this little bit of time with all of you as well. So I guess I will start with a little bit about myself, how I got to be here, how I got to be an advocate. My family came to the United States as refugees after the Second World War. And during the war, they had lost pretty much everything, and many of their family members lost everything as well as their lives. My mom was an inmate at a place called Auschwitz, so she's a concentration camp survivor. So I grew up with a mom with a number tattooed on her arm. My dad was a soldier and also a prisoner of war of the Nazis for 6 long years. So I come from a background of a lot of loss and generational trauma, a lot of which I'm having to manage even more carefully right now, considering my ancestral part of the world is once again being visited by war and new generations are being traumatized, which breaks my heart. But personally, my mental health issues, my diagnosis is really something in a way I've kind of inherited, something that came down to me across many generations. But as well as that burden, I also inherited many of the skills that I try to use in not only improving my own life and making it bearable, but improving the lives of others. So that's where I think I can come into advocacy, is something that I always realized or saw as an important survival skill. So grew up with the message that it's useful, at the same time grew up with the message that it's dangerous. And I have to go no further than to look at my family history, to see so many people who were political prisoners, who lost their lives because they stood up for themselves, lost their countries, had to relocate somewhere far across the globe. So I know it can have a price. And because of that, I want to do it, and I want other people to learn how to do it with good judgment and with appropriate caution and with skill. And I think that's something that Finding Our Voice can really put on the table for us. Two other stops along my journey that really helped for me as an advocate. Transferable skills are an important theme for me. I was a newspaper editor and reporter for many years, and I learned about how to get people's trust and get information and be strategic about how to find it and where to take it. Very important skills as an advocate. And then later on, when I finally became part of the world of mental health, I became a patient's rights advocate and suddenly was part of a system dedicated to advocacy, where I had to think about process and being a part of a larger whole and of working with other people. And especially important, and I think Chase mentioned this, learned how to advocate with people, not necessarily for people. So now I see myself as an advocate, but I'm defining myself more and more as a stakeholder. I speak out and act in the name of my interests and the interests of the communities of which I'm a part and the allies with whom I'm pulling in the same direction. So I think Finding Our Voice is an important tool right now for all of us to be looking at and using, and maybe revisiting for some of us and mastering those skills. One thing I think is very important is the emphasis on the authenticity of our voices and our experiences. And right now our movement as peers, consumers, survivors, we have had many very hard-won successes over the last 20 years or so. And now we're at a point that I'm seeing where I live in California and across the nation, a lot of pushback on our successes. People who never believed in us, in what we stood for, in our values. There's a lot of large, well-funded, well-orchestrated efforts out there to take back some of the things that we have fought so hard for. And I think Finding Our Voice is one of the tools we could use to push back on that. Part of what gives FOV, I think, the power is that authenticity, because many of the systems in which we advocate are now trying to squeeze the authenticity out of our voices, and we can't let that happen. I think FOV has power because it's based in the values that really have been the backbone of our movement from the beginning, hope and all the others, and the respect that goes into effective advocacy. So I think all of these things are tools that we need to revive, to emphasize, to keep in our toolbox, and be very conscious about using them as we put ourselves out there. Part of the pushback is we're seeing efforts to decrease the places at which we can speak, to lessen the time during which we can speak. So we need to push back on the pushback. We need to push back on other people trying to define us. Even our fellow peers sometimes can fall into that trap. So we need to get these tools, need to reclaim the thoughtfulness about how we advocate together and with each other, and how we advocate to others. I think now is a time where we need to grow our audiences, to grow kind of the communities in which we advocate and with whom we advocate, and to grow our alliances. I think history is knocking at the door, and it's time for us to One gift from COVID is a lot more people are aware of how mental health affects their lives than were before. We need to use that. We need to take our message and get rid of a lot of these boundaries and divisions that haunt us sometimes. So I think we need to mainstream, we need to reach out and work with other disabilities communities. We need to remember and renew that the people sometimes we disagree with can still be our allies. And we need to take all these wonderful tools that are in Finding Our Voice and use them to move forward. So that's kind of my little preachy message. I'm sorry to get up on my soapbox. Those of you who know me know I carry my little soapbox everywhere I go. But once again, I'm honored to be here, to be able to share with you. Honored to follow Chase. Chase, you're a hard act to follow. And now I would like to introduce Shira Collings, who also I've had the pleasure of knowing as a friend, as well as a collaborator and colleague, as I have everyone else on this call. So Shira Collings is the National Empowerment Center's youth coordinator. As a young person with lived experience of mental health challenges, trauma, and recovery, Shira is passionate about advocating for peer-led services developed by and for youth. They have played a key role in developing and implementing youth emotional CPR trainings, as well as webinars and approaches to youth leadership within mental health services. And with that, Shira, I will turn it over to you. And thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, Richard. And thanks so much, everyone. I just feel so honored to be part of this incredible webinar and part of this team. So I just wanted to share a little bit about my experiences, my lived experience, and how finding our voice has been so helpful to me and so transformative for me. So as Richard mentioned, I'm a person with lived experience of mental health challenges and some traumatic experiences of treatment. And I'm a peer, as well as I'm also a clinician, and I'm a therapist, and it's really important to me to be involved in advocacy. I have had some just really negative experiences of mental health treatment along the lines of what others have described. And I really want to speak out about that and create change within the mental health system. But unfortunately, as a therapist, as someone who is a clinician, that is sometimes hard to do. I have gotten a lot of pushback. In general, lived experience is something that's not always welcome in the mental health field. In general, it can be seen as undermining your credibility. It can be seen as something that makes you unfit to practice and an incompetent clinician. In some states, you have to disclose any mental health diagnoses in order to get licensed as a mental health professional. And that can be used to basically disqualify you from licensure, or that can be a major barrier. And so there's just a lot of stigma in the field, and also trying to critique the system that I'm working in and a part of can just be really challenging to navigate. So that's been difficult. And so for me, the Finding Our Voice training, which I was a participant of, and now I have the honor of being a trainer of, that has really helped me navigate that and like balance both my role as a therapist and as a person with lived experience who's passionate about changing the mental health system. I'm able to stay involved in advocacy, but also keep on my hat as a clinician and be able to do the clinical work that I'm passionate about too. It's a training that's really helped me to channel the anger and disillusionment that I've experienced around some of the treatments that I've had and ways that I've been harmed by the mental health system into very strategic advocacy and specific ways to create change. And that's been so important for me because, again, it's a way to be involved in the change that I want to make without giving up either identity of peer or clinician. Both are so important to me. And I think I just wanted to speak to how important this is for youth in general. I think for many youth, it's not always safe to be who we are in this world. We all know what LGBTQ folks are facing right now in terms of our sociopolitical climate. And I think it's also not safe often for youth to disclose our lived experiences with mental health, whether that's in school or as emerging professionals. I really appreciate Joanna and Chase for sharing some of their experiences and the discrimination that Chase has faced. That's very real, and it's just not always safe to be who we are and be open about our experiences. But at the same time, we also can't just be silent. I think, unfortunately, youth today are facing a socio-political climate that is unprecedented. I know that word is being used a lot, but it's an environment that is really scary in a lot of ways, is really harmful to a lot of people, a lot of youth of different backgrounds. And so we need to speak out. It's really important that youth are engaged in advocacy and are empowered to make change. And so I think finding our voice, for me, and I think for many youth, it creates an opportunity to learn how to speak out and advocate and create change while also staying safe and being strategic about how and when we share our lived experience and channeling that lived experience into change, rather than doing anything that's unsafe for ourselves. And I have had the opportunity to be a co-trainer in multiple trainings over the last few years. And I've seen so many people in these trainings find their voice. It's just so incredible to see that happen. We often come into trainings with a variety of experiences, different levels of backgrounds in advocacy, different lived experiences, diagnoses or struggles or forms of treatment, different backgrounds in terms of gender and race, et cetera. And it's just amazing. In these trainings, we all come together and share ideas and work together to talk about how we can advocate, kind of develop shared goals and figure out a plan for going forward. And it's just awesome to see. I've seen people come out of this training and do incredible advocacy work in their local area to advocate for more peer-run services, more alternatives to hospitalization and other coercive forms of treatment. And I'm just really grateful to have been part of it. I wanted to share a little bit about kind of what the training covers. It talks about how we can direct our voice into specific advocacy around what's going on in our area. And of course, as we've talked about, how to channel our anger about our lived experiences into strategic advocacy, and how to use dialogue and communication skills to work with others to plan advocacy. The training does draw a lot from emotional CPR. There's really amazing synergy there between both of the trainings. And we really talk about how we can actively listen to each other and connect emotionally, not just in terms of sharing intellectual ideas, but connect around how it makes us feel and how we can come together in our anger and our sadness, our grief over what's going on, and turn that into change. And one part of the training near the end is that each person prepares and makes a sample presentation that they would actually use in advocacy. So that's really amazing to see how people apply the skills that they've learned and make those presentations, share their vision for change. I'm really so honored to have been part of that over the years and to get to keep doing it and keep sharing this experience with others going forward. So we're now gonna go ahead and turn it over for the Q&A. I think we have some questions already that I'll go ahead and ask our panelists and our speakers, and feel free to just keep sending questions in the chat. I'm really appreciating all the feedback that we've gotten so far and really appreciate everyone for being here. So if all the other speakers, if you wanna go ahead and turn your cameras on, we can go ahead and start the Q&A portion. Awesome. Thanks, everyone. So our first question, what an amazing question. I love this. Can you talk a little bit more about MLK's idea of turning anger into passion? That's new to me. One of my favorite things to talk about. So who wants to go first?
Yeah, I'll say a word about it. I find this the biggest challenge for myself. It turns off a lot of people who haven't been labeled mentally ill They don't like it if we come to a meeting and we raise our voice. They don't like it if we say we've had enough. We don't want to hear anymore. I think it's similar to the struggle that people BIPOC or LGBTQ go through. Both my daughters identify as queer, and I've gotten a lot of edge of anger from them that as a heteronormative, male, it's hard for me to understand the queer world. So I think humility is very important on the part of people that are attending these meetings. I mean, there's finding our voice and finding our passionate voice and recognizing that, we have to be cognizant that people are not necessarily going to hear everything we say if we're overly angry, but it's also important that people that are receiving our voice be respectful and humble and willing to learn. And I say one other thing. It's very important if you go to a meeting and to have other people at the meeting that you can check in with, that you can watch, so an ally. And there was a judge, Ginger, at the in the commission that I was on, and she was an ally. I didn't realize it at first, but she was an ally, and she was in favor of our rights as people labeled with mental illness. So I'd check in, I'd watch her. If I was speaking, she sort of would signal to me non-verbally, yeah, or and you gauge that way. Am I pushing too much? Am I pushing too far? Am I not pushing enough? And it's a pretty narrow channel sometimes. How much to push, how much to pull. But checking in with other people as well as checking in with yourself is very important. But don't suppress your anger too much. It's what motivates us. It's where our energy comes from. It's what has driven me for, I don't know, 40, 50 years. So that's what I would say about my anger. How about others? Any others of you guys want to chip in? I saw Joanna smiling a few times.
Thank you, Dad. For me, there's this concept of like leaving our hats at the door with ECPR and finding our voice. And to me, I guess, I also have ADHD, so attention deficit hyperactive disorder. So I can tend to have a lot going on in my mind. It actually helps to know where the hats are. So when to, I'm putting on my advocate hat today, and at the same time, because for me, while I'm advocating as a mom, those emotions are real. I'm going full mama bear mode on you, but I want to be effective. And same goes for the people that I hope to serve in our peer community. For me to be effective in this platform, what can I do? Knowing that you're part of a whole, and part of finding our voice is about that cohesiveness, and also learning to suspend our judgment, at least even just for the brief moment, just so you can get to be able to really listen and key in and make that connection with others who might have a different view than you.
Very good. Any other? Should we go to another question, Sharon?
Sure. So we have one question. It says, how can I best support a family member clinically diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder who functions well with daily activities, hygiene, career, clean with personal space, etc., yet trying to carry on conversations, be it personal interests or ideas, work-related, daily check-in, etc. It sounds like that part is maybe more challenging. Do people have thoughts on how to best support or advocate for a family member with those challenges?
Joanne, you've been working with Chase. Chase has been working with you.
I don't know if I have like a specific answer to this question. It's a great one, but I think we want to resonate with that, with just the beauty of this question, right? Hoping to get support from community. Maybe some people who've had similar experiences as this individual that they're aiming to support. I think that's that, just acknowledging that compassion that you have for that individual, and then that your goal is to empower them to be able to do these things. That's not a light thing. For me, the people who have supported me and those who support my son, it's been a journey, but there's power in asking the right questions with ourselves and others. And my son had like a speech delay, so they would tell me things, kind of pathologizing what he's experiencing, the books that they would tell me to read. So I went from Overcoming Autism book, it was very clinical, and that's the first book, and then to like finding the neurodiversity community, to finding voices that people share about their own experience, who actually have that lived experience. So that's how I came to support my son, and just keying in on what my son would do. I would teach him words by singing it to him, because I realized that that's how he would listen. When I would tune my guitar, he would hum the notes. I was like, wow, there's musical talent there. So I actually learned how to play the piano a little bit, so because I couldn't afford to give him lessons. But I was able to get that for him, and he is self-taught. So what you saw in the video, that's all him. And again, that message is so important, right? The way the world shares a message of who we are, rather than finding it as a journey. So I don't know if that made sense at all, but I hope it helped in some way.
I might add to that, this other training that we do, emotional CPR, is very much based on what we wanted, how we wanted people to interact with us when we were in other realities. And the question is really not a clinical question, it's a human question. We want a human being first and foremost. We want somebody who's authentic, somebody who's vulnerable, somebody who shares their own feelings. When I was hospitalized and in my most dire period, it was people with least clinical training who could reach me. And they did it very much, it was through emotions and through feelings and through nonverbal communication. Their smile, their frown, their hand gestures. And that's what we try to teach to families, actually, is don't try to converse in just the verbal level, but with the heart level, as Chase was saying, from your heart to heart. That's where it comes from. Your heart to my heart. That's where we communicate. That's where we connect. And that's really the message that we've learned from doing hundreds of these trainings. I don't know if that resonates with Chase. Does that make sense to you, Chase? That if you can reach, somebody can reach you at your heart level? Yeah. You reached us at your heart level, by the way, Chase. You can feel your heart.
Can I chip into the conversation, if I may? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. First of all, I don't want to presume, and I don't want to be preachy, given the nature of your relationship with your family member. I think in all kind of interpersonal relationships, sometimes they get more difficult the closer you are on a lot of levels. I probably, when I started working as a patient's rights advocate and was trying to advocate with people who are under threat of having their liberty taken away from them based on a criteria of being dangerous to themselves or to others, or what in California we call gravely disabled, which is, oh, you're so sick, you're too vulnerable because of that. And that really put me in a position to work closely and try and get the trust of people who maybe at that point in time were very different from me and where I was that point in time. And I came to appreciate something I learned as a reporter, the power of listening, the power of respect. And I really learned that, you know, to value the differences if they weren't destructive, but the fact that you all are different from me, that gives us the space to learn from each other. It's because we're different that we can teach and learn from each other. So I saw the possibility with that. And sometimes in longer relationships with people whose society would say, oh, they're very sick or they're psychotic, a lot of times I found if I could kind of understand their language and what they were saying, there was resilience and wisdom and so much there that they had to share, and society was doing so much to trying to cut that off. So I try not to be judgmental. I try to be a good listener. I try to always respect the other person and their rights, no matter how different they are from me. And that gives me kind of a platform, I think, to build on. And one thing I like, Joanna's mentioned the whole neurodiversity movement. One thing I really like that I'm seeing in that movement, kind of compared to our mental health movement, is amongst many of the advocates in those communities, kind of a refusal after a certain point to let themselves be labeled, to let themselves be defined by others, and kind of a defiant and I think very healthy and to me very hopeful attitude about, yes, I'm different, but I still count. And that doesn't mean because I'm different, you need to start confining me or taking things away from me. So those are kind of my thoughts, and thanks for letting me share.
Would you like me to go ahead and ask our next question?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, we had this question a few times. Several people wanted to get a copy of the checklist that Chase and Joanna used. So would you be willing to maybe say that and put it in the chat too?
Yes, and actually Chase and I co-created the checklist. So, and I want to tell, before, since he was a baby, I would always tell him that he's smart, strong, and kind. And through my journey of learning about myself and healing, I thought about it. It's like, those are things he kind of has to do, but I wanted him to have a sense of that self-worth that's inherent in all of us, no matter where we are in our mental health, physical health, socioeconomic status. So do you want to share the checklist, Chase? And I'll type it. What was the checklist?
The checklist is, do I feel loved, valued, supported, connected, heard, safe?
Thank you, Chase.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I love that checklist.
Mm-hmm.
I will probably be stealing that for therapy with clients. So thank you. Yeah, our next question is about where is the Finding Our Voice training, getting some more information about that. So I did just want to say, I did put the interest form into the chat. So please feel free to go ahead and complete that if you are interested in taking the Finding Our Voice training. We'd love to have you. Does anyone else have anything you want to add to that or information on upcoming trainings? We can go ahead with the next question. Is it necessary to have a lot of experience to be an effective Finding Our Voice speaker? Um, I would just say no, but I'll let others jump in too with longer explanations.
No, you don't need a lot of experience. The more comfort you have with yourself and the more you know yourself, the more effective you'll be in speaking. Because Maya Angelou said it quite well. It's hard to improve on it. And she said, people rarely remember the words that you use, but they remember how you made them feel. But you can only help people to feel what you're saying if you feel what you're saying. If you don't feel what you're saying, they're not going to feel it. But if you do feel it, there's a better chance that they'll feel it. And this is a movement really of sort of contagious feelings. I know we've been trapped in this COVID for several years, but I think one of the best defenses, and it's actually been shown, our immune system is very much activated by our social connections. So the more we can stay connected with each other socially, which is really hard given that social isolation is one of the prescriptions for having COVID. But one way or another, if it's by Zoom or by phone or by letter, and just talking to each other outside, stay connected at an emotional heart level, and you'll be healthier physically, mentally, and spiritually. Simple, huh? Chase, you seem to like that idea, huh? Yeah. I'm checking what I say with Chase.
Well, if it's okay, we can move on to the next question. I think this is a really important question. Where can people go to access advocacy on issues that nobody understands? I tried to do so, but was subjected to a 10-year hate campaign during which people made me out to be mentally unstable just for having personal boundaries. And many made me think nobody else needed the sort of support I needed, making me feel even more alone. So how do people access advocacy, even if nobody else understands?
Who wants to jump in there?
I can take a try at it if possible. Thank you, Mia, for this question. I don't know if that I'll answer it, and I'll just share from my perspective. Part of my lived experience is surviving childhood sexual abuse and ongoing and by a family member, which in my culture is tough to talk about. And a lot of my fellow survivors, we carry a lot of heaviness, and speaking up about it is not always welcome in spaces. So finding community is definitely important because of how kind of like if hope was like a flickering light, we're just trying to protect my own. It's tough when our own boundaries and even in the ways we choose to speak up, which is part of our healing, can be viewed as something adversarial or just against what other people would like to hear or want to be a part of. So I don't necessarily have any advice except that you're not alone, and there are communities out there who share those personal experiences and boundaries that, I started off being so isolated and not having the tools. I have 14 college units to my name, and not really knowing how I can move forward and survive. But it really helped to find one person in the community and really building on that. And again, like Dan was saying, that emotional connection. And it really helped me go from that monologue of, what happened to me, why is this happening, to really affirming my own inner wisdom. I've also recovered from various eating disorders. And one way that I had treatment of getting rid of it, but one way that I healed from it was to honor it, to say that that part of myself was actually a form of survival. That was a form of wisdom to protect my young mind. It had its tools, and I honor it. And that was a way that I moved forward. So if that resonated with you somehow, I hope that you do find communities instead of that hate campaign to go where the love is and find that for yourself. So thank you for your vulnerable share, Mia.
Yeah, I just want to echo that. Thank you for your willingness to be vulnerable and share that with us. Our next question is one for Richard. And this person is asked, how can we emphasize our gifts?
Well, gosh, as a great American once said, by any means necessary. I want to start with it's also kind of a half answer to the previous question, but something to do is realize the fact that you're part of this conversation, the fact that you're at this particular table and maybe looking forward to future trainings and things like taking FOV, finding our voice, is a testament to your resilience, to your strength, to your creativity, to your adaptability. The fact that you're here now, that you're alive and kicking and wanting to go forward is, you should be able, whether you have a physical mirror or not, to look at yourself, and despite everything everyone else has said about you, you not only have worth, you have gifts, you have things to share with the world. And the greatest testament to that is you yourself. I don't know what your gifts are, but as we make more connections, as we build stronger alliances, I found in my life that the opportunities to share, those doors open and open wider. And so it's about connectivity, it's about building trust, it's about building the skills to share. And once again, sharing is based on listening too. So all those things, and I hope I'm just not spouting cliches here, but I really think those are things that when I look at myself, I find to be true. And I hope they are for you, and that they'll continue to be for you, and that space to grow and to learn and to share will continue to grow as you continue to explore your life. So I hope that makes sense.
Thank you so much. Our next question is about kind of the format of finding our voice. How long is the training, and is it by Zoom? So Dan, do you want to speak more?
Yeah, I can speak to that. Yes, it is by Zoom now. We ideally would like to do it in person. That's the way it was originally developed. It consists of 6 2.5-hour sessions, and with a break in the middle. And a lot of the emphasis is on building a group together as we discover our voice during the training process itself. And then in the end, we encourage people to put together a 3 to 4 minute talk of what they would like to most get across to the world around them in terms of advocacy, what they're advocating for, whether it's something very personal or something larger, but just something that really connects with their heart. Does that answer anything?
I think so.
Yeah.
And we have one other question about the training. Do therapists and family trainings include healing from intergenerational trauma?
Oh yeah, always. Yeah. um, there's no doubt in my mind that we carry all of our relatives, all of our ancestors with us, their strengths as well as their traumas. And there's this internal family systems approach that I've recently been reading about. I think Schwartz is the name, maybe Richard Schwartz. Um, Very interesting how it resonates with the emotional CPR, because he talks about mono mind is where you start often, where there's a separation between your various parts. And that's what we call in emotional CPR, um, being in monologue, or, at the beginning. So many of us start out with just our own version, and for defensive purposes, that's all we can think about, cut off from who we are. And yeah, the various parts of us have been, I don't know, we've, through our interactions with our friends and relatives, have become part of who we are, but we need to find a way to integrate them. And honestly, I saw one of the comments there about psychosis. For me, I do believe that my going into alternate realities was an important part of my healing process. And I think seeing the strength and the positivity of our struggles. I think Joanna was mentioning something about eating, which may be called a disorder, but was really a strength in a way, in the sense of trying to cope with trauma. Well, many of what we go through are really ways of coping with trauma. And there's a very interesting alternative to the DSM. It's come out of England. Critical psychologists in England, like Lucy Johnson, and also people who lived experience there. And it's called the power threat meaning paradigm. And basically says that almost all, perhaps all, of mental distress that's labeled with various diagnostic labels is a response to trauma. And I know Joanne very bravely talked about hers, and I know I went through it as a child also, sexual trauma, but there are many traumas that interfere with our capacity to be who we truly are. And the last thing I'll mention is in a training recently in Scotland, a woman said that when she was supported in emotional CPR, she felt she could be the person she was born to be. And I was so struck by that. And at that moment, a terrible pain that she had experienced for many, many years left her. And much of our pain, physical pain, is often due to the inability to be who we truly are. And that's the theme of finding our voice and emotional CPR, is to find out who you truly are and be the person you truly were meant to be, not what someone else expected you to be. I don't know if I answered the question.
I think you absolutely did. Thank you so much. That was a fantastic answer.
You're welcome.
So powerful. Yeah, I think maybe we have time for one more question and then we can wrap up. How do you recommend autonomous people on the higher functioning end of the autism spectrum be taken seriously? More often than not, the second I say autism or on the spectrum, all of a sudden my opinions and feelings are not valid. How can we get people to take those on the autism spectrum seriously when the stigma is so incredibly apparent? I've been advocating for a few years now, but this is an issue that doesn't seem to get any traction, especially coming from someone on the spectrum themselves.
Joanne? Chase?
Sorry, I was just trying to follow reading, so I need to look for the question to process it.
About the stigma of autism, I think, is what it's primarily focused on. How can a person be taken seriously if they're given a label of autism?
I can't speak for everybody. I think it's on an individual level. I know for a lot of women and females, girls, it's tough to get an actual diagnosis. So there's barriers to treatment, accommodations, and things like that. So I myself struggled with it. I struggle with social cues, and sometimes, but it helps to know your own self, as somebody, I think it was Richard, mentioned, to know your strengths, and to like kind of figure out ways and supports, and that inner dialogue, whatever helps that, to help yourself feel confident in however you choose to identify, and regardless of how your outer world may choose, to still be able to step in your shoes and walk confidently. And I know that's hard to do sometimes. I've struggled to get accommodations at work, which is why I've chosen to take part of Reclaiming Employment, which is a live and learn research and program that's right now just launched in June. So feel free to check that out, just a little plug. But I think that having an inclusive world, right, is what we all want to strive for. And I think tools like Finding Our Voice, Dan has this slide of like dialogue and discussion. So, and they talk about like being adversarial. So I try to step in spaces to kind of, like, similar with Chase, like he is the anti-stigma without having to say the word. He is an example. I try to be an example of, and then when I do get that window of opportunity to maybe share some experience and wisdom, or just points of view, and maybe help shape or shift somebody else's opinion about what that means to be on the spectrum, then I did that. But I'm not going to take on the world for myself, because I need my personal energy for myself. So I hope that helped somehow.
Thank you so much, Joanna. We are at the end of our time, so I just want to thank all of you. It was, again, such an honor to be part of this group, and I want to thank everyone for being here. And I'll turn it over now to the rest of you if you have any final wrap up things to say, and then we can go ahead and end the webinar.
I'd like to throw something in that maybe is kind of a general statement, but also addresses to a little bit that last question. And I'm just coming from the perspective of somebody who has faced stigma as somebody with a history of mental health challenges. But in general, how I try and live my life is to face my challenges with as much courage and skill as I can muster, and to forgive myself when I err or make mistakes, not to be judgmental on myself. And as far as people's expectations about me and people like me, and about how they see limits on us that we don't want to acknowledge, nothing more powerful than to lead by example. And when it comes to stigma, prove them wrong. Show them what you can do. Show them, even if you do it differently, prove them wrong. And that's something I think we all have the capacity to do. And just tap into that. You are your strength. And I guess that's my final thought. Thanks.
Chase or Joanna, do you have final thoughts? Or?
Thank you all for attending this webinar. And thanks for the comments of my video.
Joanna?
Ditto. Thank you, National Empowerment Center, for having us.
Very welcome. Shara?
Just thank you, everyone. Hope to stay in touch. Hope to see you at future webinars or trainings.
Yeah, thank everybody too. And it's really by facing these challenges together that we can overcome the stigma and discrimination, the lack of rights. We can't do it alone. We need each other. And I'm so encouraged by the response that we received today, because that gives me further energy to keep at it, to keep trying to move these terrible attitudes. But they are moving. And the arc of history, as Martin Luther King said, I think does move towards justice. It's a friend of mine, it's always dangerous to say a friend of mine who's black, but he and I laugh about it. But I was saying just a couple of days ago, gee, things seem to be getting worse. He said, if you're black, they're overall not getting worse. And I think recognizing for people with label of mental illness, we're not in snake pits. We're not being lobotomized. Where there are steps forward. We're running our own organizations, and we're creating alternatives. Ron Mannerscheid said the only significant advances in the mental health system in the last 20 years have been created by people lived experience. I want him to write it down in a paper, but until he does, I'll repeat it every time I can. So we are, Richard, we are making a difference. And Joanna and Chase and Shira and everyone who's here watching and sharing with us. So thank you very much. I know we went over a little bit, I'm sorry.
Thank you so much. Bye, everybody. Have a good rest of your day.
Bye-bye.